This just in, a surprise twist in court for an Arkansas social worker charged in the deadly shooting of a Memphis pastor at his home in Collierville. Latasha Daniels is accused of killing Brodes Perry in front of his wife last month. Investigators believe it was a love triangle gone sour.
A respected pastor, a sudden visitor, a whispered confession, and a gunshot that shattered a peaceful home. This is the shocking case of Pastor Brodes Perry and the woman who said, "You broke my heart." On April 4th, 2019, everything changed for Pastor Brodes Perry and his wife, Tabitha. Tabitha opened the apartment door and saw someone familiar, Latasha Daniels. She wasn't a stranger. They knew her from their time in Arkansas. But that meetup ended in blood. What's the truth behind this case? Let's rewind a bit. Brodes Perry was 36 years old and came from a long line of pastors. Faith ran in his family. Even though he had a degree in business from Florida and worked in the business world for a while, he eventually followed his heart into ministry. Life hadn't always been smooth. His first marriage ended, but he found love again with Tabitha, and they started building a new life together. They got the chance to move to Memphis when Brodes was offered a big role as executive pastor at Mississippi Boulevard Christian Church. It was a major church with thousands of members. This job wasn't just about preaching. He helped run the place and support the senior pastor. For Brodes and Tabitha, it felt like a fresh start. They settled into a nice, quiet apartment in Collierville, a safe and peaceful suburb. Neighbors saw them as kind but private, like a church leader and his wife, living a calm life. Meanwhile, Latasha Daniels, 39, was educated and worked as a clinical social worker. She specialized in helping people with anger issues. Kind of ironic considering what was about to happen. She had her own practice, had spoken at conferences, and was respected in her field. Friends said she was smart, calm, and professional. Not someone you'd ever think would be involved in something violent. So, what was her connection to the Perrys? That's the part no one fully understands. That evening, around 9 p.m., Tabitha Perry was home alone when she heard a knock at the door. Opening it, she was surprised to see Latasha Daniels standing there. Latasha hadn't called ahead to announce her visit. She had driven more than 2 hours from Little Rock to Memphis, apparently on impulse. Despite the unexpected nature of the visit, Tabitha invited Latasha inside. The two women talked while waiting for Brodes to return home. Their conversation was casual, catching up on mutual acquaintances and discussing changes in their lives since the Perrys had moved to Memphis. There was no indication, at least from Tabitha's perspective, that anything was amiss. When Brodes finally arrived home, he appeared surprised to see Latasha but greeted her warmly. The three engaged in conversation for a while, though Tabitha would later describe feeling that something about the interaction seemed weird, as if there was an undercurrent she couldn't quite identify. Perhaps it was tension in Latasha's posture, or a look that passed between her and Brodes. Subtle signals that something wasn't right. As the evening grew late, Latasha prepared to leave. Both Brodes and Tabitha stood to walk her to the door, a routine moment of hospitality that would suddenly turn tragic. At the doorway, Latasha did something that shattered the calm of the evening. She pulled out a gun, aimed it directly at Brodes Perry, and began firing. As the shots rang out in the quiet apartment complex, Latasha reportedly shouted the same phrase over and over, "You broke my heart." The words echoed through the apartment, punctuated by gunfire. Tabitha, witnessing the attack on her husband, screamed in horror as Brodes collapsed to the floor, bleeding from multiple gunshot wounds. When Latasha briefly turned to leave, Tabitha rushed to a neighbor's door, banging frantically for help. Panic and adrenaline pushed her as she screamed for someone, anyone, to call 911. But when she returned to check on her wounded husband, Latasha had come and shot Tabitha, shooting her in the left shoulder. By the time police arrived at the apartment complex, they found a chaotic scene. Brodes was seriously wounded with 3 gunshot wounds, bleeding heavily on the floor of his own home. Tabitha was injured but conscious, applying pressure to her shoulder wound while trying to comfort her dying husband. And remarkably, Latasha was still there, gun in hand, as if frozen in the aftermath of her actions. Officers ordered Latasha to drop her weapon, but she initially refused. standing in a daze with the gun still clutched in her hand. Police had to use non-lethal force to subdue her. Even after being taken to a nearby hospital for evaluation, Latasha continued to fight, breaking away from officers and running down a hospital hallway toward an ICU area. When they caught up with her, she physically struggled with them, grabbing at an officer's shirt and actively resisting arrest. The woman who had spent years teaching others how to control their anger seemed completely unable to manage her own emotions in that moment. It was a stark and disturbing contradiction. The professional anger management specialist now in the grip of rage so powerful, it had led to violence and continued to fuel her resistance to authority. Meanwhile, medical teams were fighting to save Brodes' life. He had sustained 3 gunshot wounds, and his condition was critical from the moment he arrived at the emergency room. Despite their efforts throughout the night, he was pronounced dead the following day from his injuries, leaving his congregation without a leader and his wife without a husband. News of the shooting spread quickly through Memphis's religious community. The death of an executive pastor, particularly under such violent circumstances, was shocking. Within hours, church members began gathering at Mississippi Boulevard Christian Church, holding proper prayer services for their fallen leader and his injured wife. The senior pastor released a statement asking for privacy for the Perry family, while expressing profound grief at the loss. As the investigation unfolded, things started getting more complicated than anyone expected. People kept asking the same question over and over. How could someone like Latasha, a well-educated woman with no criminal record, who spent her career helping others manage their emotions, especially anger, suddenly snap and commit something this extreme? The Collierville police weren't taking anything lightly. They dug deep. They interviewed Tabitha Perry, friends, co-workers, and anyone who might know something about the relationships between Brodes, Latasha, and the church communities in both Memphis and Little Rock. They pulled phone records, text messages, emails, looking for anything that could explain what triggered that night. And slowly, the truth started coming out. It turned out the connection between Brodes and Latasha wasn't just some old church acquaintance thing. According to evidence and some witness statements, they had been involved in a romantic relationship, one that had been kept quiet and hidden from almost everyone. It had apparently started back in Little Rock when they were both part of St. Mark Baptist Church. The messages that were discovered on their phones were not appropriate for sending to random church friends. Investigators found flirty exchanges and messages that hinted at a much deeper emotional connection. Some friends from Little Rock also recalled seeing them together in settings that felt a little too personal for a pastor and a church member. At the time, no one thought too much of it, but in hindsight, the pieces started to fit together. For Tabitha, this was more than just shocking. It was heartbreaking. She told the police she had no idea her husband had been involved with Latasha in that way. Nothing had ever been confirmed or even hinted at. But after hearing what happened that night, especially when Latasha allegedly said, "You broke my heart," it became hard to deny something had been going on. In her interview, Tabitha opened up about a few things that, looking back, started to make more sense, like those random late-night calls Brodes used to take in another room, or the sudden trips back to Little Rock that lasted longer than expected. She remembered feeling a little uneasy sometimes, but she had always trusted her husband. She never thought he'd lie to her, let alone cheat. It was the kind of betrayal that cut deep. Not just as a wife, but as someone who believed in the man she had built her life with. And now she had to sit with that pain, while also grieving his loss, all because of a relationship she didn't even know existed. As investigators kept digging, even more details started to come out. Details that made everything even heavier and helped explain just how deep things had gotten between Brodes and Latasha. According to some reports, their relationship hadn't just been a passing fling. It had gone far enough that Latasha had become pregnant at one point during their affair. People close to her later said she had confided in someone about it, and that Brodes had pressured her to get an abortion. That part hit hard. For a woman who had spent her life helping others deal with emotional pain, it seems Latasha found herself carrying a pain she didn't know how to handle. That mix of heartbreak, betrayal, and emotional damage might have been building up in her for months, maybe even years. So when she stood in that apartment, face to face with Brodes again after all that time. All those bottled-up emotions probably came rushing to the surface. It wasn't just about a breakup, or even the pregnancy. It was about feeling discarded, silenced, erased. And that kind of pain, left untreated, unspoken, unhealed, can twist into something dark. Of course, none of this justifies what she did. Nothing could. But it starts to paint a clearer picture of Latasha's mental condition. During further investigations, friends of Latasha told investigators that she had become increasingly distressed in the months leading up to the shooting. She had spoken of feeling betrayed by someone she loved but hadn't named the person. When the news about the shooting spread, church members were completely stunned. It was hard for them to believe that Pastor Perry, the same man who preached about faith, honesty, and family every Sunday, might have been living a double life. People didn't know what to think. Some stood by him right away, saying the rumors couldn't be true. They believed in him. They thought maybe people were just twisting the story or adding drama to a tragedy. But others? They felt deeply let down. They started to question everything he had said from the pulpit. All those sermons about loyalty and trust, were they real? Or was he just saying what people wanted to hear? For Tabitha, the heartbreak went even deeper. This was the man who had convinced her to start over in a new city. To everyone on the outside, their marriage seemed strong, but inside there were cracks that no one could see. The distance between Little Rock and Memphis isn't small. It's about 140 miles, over 2 hours of driving. So when Latasha made that trip, it wasn't something she just did on a whim. It wasn't like she just happened to be in the area and dropped by. She went there for a reason. And as investigators kept digging, it became clearer that this wasn't some heat-of-the-moment decision either. They found out Latasha had bought the gun legally months before the shooting. She didn't just grab a weapon out of anger one day. She took a safety course, got all the proper permits, and followed the rules. That kind of preparation showed this was something she had been thinking about for a while, maybe even planning. Phone records showed she had tried to reach out to Brodes several times in the weeks before that night. Her texts and calls got more and more intense. It seemed like she was desperate to get a response, but he wasn't answering her. Then April 4th happened. After the shooting, things changed fast for Latasha. She was arrested and charged with first-degree murder for killing Brodes Perry. She also faced charges for trying to kill Tabitha, using a firearm during a felony, assaulting a police officer, and resisting arrest. The court process began with an arrest where the charges were formally presented. Latasha appeared before the judge in jail attire, a stark contrast to the professional clothing she had worn throughout her career. When asked how she pleaded, she responded, "Not guilty," to all charges, setting the stage for what would likely be a lengthy legal battle. The legal process moved slowly, as is often the case with complex murder trials. Evidence, witness testimony, and procedural issues were all covered in a number of pretrial hearings. By 2021, there were reports that Latasha had gone through changes in her legal representation. Her original attorney, Leslie Ballin, a prominent Memphis defense lawyer, formally withdrew from the case due to fundamental disagreements about trial strategy and how to proceed with the defense. Court records indicated fundamental differences of opinion about trial strategy and approach. A judge appointed a court-appointed lawyer after Latasha indicated she no longer had funds to pay for private representation. The new attorney, Junie Ganguly, took over the case and began preparing for trial. The defense strategy remained unclear, though legal experts speculated that they might pursue an approach based on extreme emotional distress or temporary mental impairment. Some wondered if the maximum punishments for first-degree murder could be avoided by negotiating a plea deal. Court appearances revealed a woman greatly changed from the professional social worker she had once been. Now wearing jail attire instead of business clothing, Latasha sat through hearings as attorneys discussed the serious charges against her. The court scheduled a jury trial, though delays continued to push the date further into the future. The COVID-19 pandemic that began in 2020 created additional complications for the legal process, with court operations disrupted and many proceedings delayed. This extended the time Latasha spent in pretrial detention, and prolonged the wait for resolution for all parties involved. The case brought to light difficult questions about trust, fidelity, and the consequences of hidden relationships. For Tabitha Perry, the violence of that night was compounded by the revelation that her husband may have been unfaithful. Friends reported that Tabitha struggled with grief complicated by confusion and betrayal. She withdrew from public life for a period, seeking privacy during her healing process. The congregation at Mississippi Boulevard Christian Church also had to come to terms with the fact that their spiritual leader had potentially been living in a way that contradicted the values he preached from the pulpit. In church communities like Mississippi Boulevard, pastors often hold positions of significant respect and authority. The betrayal of trust represented by this scandal affected not just church members, but the wider Memphis religious community. Local religious leaders used the tragedy as an opportunity to discuss the pressures faced by clergy and the importance of accountability structures within churches. The tragedy affected multiple communities across 2 states. The parents of Latasha expressed shock and disbelief at their daughter's actions. They described a child who had always been driven to help others, who had overcome obstacles to build a successful career in social work. Similarly, Brodes' family struggled to accept both his death. The relationship between Brodes and Latasha became the spotlight. What exactly did he promise her? How serious was their involvement? Did others in their Little Rock community suspect the relationship? These questions may never be fully answered. For those who study domestic and relationship violence, the case offers a sobering reminder that crimes of passion can occur even among educated, professional individuals with no prior criminal history. Psychologists who reviewed the case noted that Latasha's actions followed patterns sometimes seen in rejection-triggered violence. In Latasha's situation, reports suggested she may have experienced additional emotional and hormonal stressors, including a reported pregnancy and abortion. What we do know is that on April 4, 2019, the lives of several people changed forever in a moment of violence. A respected pastor lost his life, a professional woman became a murder suspect, and a wife was left to pick up the pieces of a life that had suddenly been revealed to be very different than she had believed. As this case continues through the legal system, it serves as a powerful reminder of how quickly lives can change. What are your thoughts on this tragic story? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If you are new to the channel and like the content, please subscribe and hit the notification bell for upcoming episodes. Your support is greatly appreciated. Until next time, I will see you on Urban Crime Stories.